2018 meeting of the Stafford County Board of Supervisors is called to order. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Ms. Bumke,
Here.
Mr. Cavalier,
Here.
Mr. Dudenheffer,
Here.
Mrs. Maurer,
Here.
Ms. Shelton,
Here.
Mr. Snellings.
Here.
Madam Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Meg Bomke. I represent the Falmouth District, and I'm the chair of the Stafford County Board of Supervisors. Do we have any additions or deletions to the agenda? Do we have a motion to approve the agenda?
There is an addition.
We have two additions.
We have one addition and one handout.
Correct.
Okay. So motion to approve the agenda with item number 16 added.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Cast your vote. Tally the vote. Oh. What's wrong there? There we go. Motion passes unanimously. We do have the NAACP coming in for a presentation with their youth council. They might be running a little late, so we'll come back to that if they come in. And now we move on to the library proclamation. If I could have Martha Hutzel and Miss Purdy come down, please. And we have somebody else who's joined us.
We have Cheryl Miller, the Vice Chair
Yes.
of the Library Board.
Oh, hi, Cheryl, come on up. Thank you for joining us, and if we could turn around. So we wanted to acknowledge the library for the recognition that they've received again in the state of Virginia, because they are one of the only libraries in the state of Virginia. And so this is very significant, and we wanted to recognize them. So I'm going to read this proclamation, and then they have a few comments, because I asked them in advance if they would share with us what makes their library different. Why are they a standout system? So I'm going to let you tell their story when I'm done. Whereas for 10 years, the Library Journal has been honoring libraries across the United States by rating their offerings, and whereas this year, libraries were rated in an index of 5 measures: circulation, library visits, program attendance, public internet computer use, and circulation of electronic materials, and whereas 7,409 libraries in the United States qualified to be rated in the index, but only 259 were designated star libraries, receiving 3-star, 4-star, or 5-star designations. And whereas the Central Rappahannock Regional Library was one of only 3 libraries in the Commonwealth of Virginia to be designated a star library. And whereas the Central Rappahannock Regional Library was named a 4-star library for the 4th year in a row. Whereas the Central Rappahannock Regional Library is a much appreciated and much loved resource for Stafford County citizens. Now, therefore, be it proclaimed by the Stafford County Board of Supervisors on this, the 6th day of February, 2018, that it be and hereby does recognize the Central Rappahannock Regional Library for being honored as a 4-star library for 4 years in a row, and for its service and dedication to the citizens of Stafford County. Wow. That's great. Congratulations,
Meg.
and thank you for joining us today. Good to see you, Rebecca. So I'll let you take it from here.
I will. Thank you very much. I'm going to tell you how our library system does this, because it's the library system of the entire region, whether you visit frequently or just occasionally. So one of the many ways that we reach and maintain our 4-star library status is by offering access to many different resources that improve quality of life in the community. Of course, we cannot do any of that without outstanding staff. All of our core locations offer free notary services, access to scanning, faxing, printing, and computers, access to legal resources, a law library, and business databases. For example, Reference USA, which can be used as a marketing tool for businesses. And I'd like to explain that a little bit. So if a resident was, for instance, making organic dog treats and they wanted to sell them to every homeowner in Embry Mills, they could access Reference USA, get the name of every homeowner and their address, and mail them a flyer or something else like that, so they would know who lives there. They won't know whether they own a dog, though, I'm sorry. We have Law Depot, which allows you to print out court-accepted legal forms. They're simply blank forms that you can turn in to court in case you cannot afford an attorney. We offer early literacy classes so that children come to school ready to learn, and STEM classes so that children are ready to compete in the 21st century and ready to go to school when they enter Stafford County schools. Both the Porter and Howell branch have maker labs available to all ages, and customers can get badged or certified to use the equipment independently. So we actually make a Maker Lab badge in the Maker Lab. The Joint Use Library with Germanna Community College will open this summer, and we look forward to a continued partnership to benefit the community. Thank you for taking the time to recognize Stafford County and for all of your support all these years. It means the world to us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank you
again.
so much. And thank you for
Much
coming.
appreciated.
Yep.
Thank you.
And next, we have one of our other jewels in the community, our school division, and we have Dr. Bruce Benson with us, the superintendent today. Dr. Benson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Vice Chair Snellings, members of the board, Mr. Foley, it's my pleasure to share some information about things that are going on in the school system this afternoon. We've got some handout materials, I think, at your place for your review. I think the first thing we have there for you to take a look at is our new, our new State of Schools annual report. We report to the board on an annual basis, but we felt like we wanted to go a step further this past year and put together a report really specifically for the community. I apologize. We have a great story to tell, and we think this is an avenue for us to tell that. There are two different versions at your place. There's kind of the Reader's Digest version, which is just a few pages, and then we have a more complete publication that talks about our successes as a school system, outcomes for our students, how we're doing with our finances, and a number of other initiatives. May be suitable for a coffee table, I don't know, but you might want to think about that. I'd also like to talk a little bit about a recent event that we held. We had a superintendent's yellow bus tour where we had an opportunity to tour some of our schools with business partners and public officials. It was a great half of a day, and I got to play tour guide, which was great. Talk a little bit about, thank you. Talk about what's going on in our schools while we're on the bus, as well as visiting our three schools, an elementary, middle school, and a high school. And it caught some attention from the regional public relations group, Chesbra, and we've been invited to present that model at their conference coming up in March, right? We've also implemented another vehicle to help engage and respond to inquiries from our community on our webpage called Ask the Expert. And so in our main banner page on the website, you can go and enter a question, put in your email address, and we'll respond. Sometimes it's just about location of additional information, and sometimes it's a specific question that might get routed to our chief financial officer or somebody in HR in order for us to try and be responsive to folks. So another avenue for folks to ask and have questions answered. I also want to talk a little bit about a new superintendent's committee that we're in the process of organizing, a superintendent's equity, diversity, and opportunity committee. This is the first time that we've put a group like this together in the school division. The board has charged me to put together an advisory committee that would have stakeholders, including teachers, administrators, both school-based and central office, parents, students, community members, and that the community members would include, but not limited to, faith leaders, business leaders, and other community partners to take a look at some challenges within the school system, to include achievement gaps in reading and math, cultural competence and recognition, differentiated resources and support, disproportionate discipline, gifted education, and specialty program access, diversity perceptions, protections, and bullying policy, and our workforce diversity. We are going to have our first meeting on February 28th. We're looking for committee members. If board members have someone that they think might be a great addition to the committee, I would love to get a name or two, and you can certainly just email those to me. We're thinking that the committee is going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 30 members or so. We want to make sure that we've got broad perspective to be shared across the county. And I'm real excited about having Ms. Charlene Green come to the first meeting and help us get started. Ms. Green is with the city of Charlottesville. She is the manager for their Human Rights Office and has considerable experience in helping groups like the one that we're envisioning here get started. This is not a short-term effort for the school division, although the board is expecting us to come back with some recommendations, considerations in the next 3 to 6 months. But I see the work of this committee being long-range, and we've got a number of things I think that we'll be examining throughout the school system. For example, the board has recently received some reports related to our IB program, APPX, and the governor's school, and one of the things that we're looking at is participation, and does that participation mirror our student population? And I think there are some challenges there for us to take a look at. So this will be a vehicle for us to review that data and then figure out what we might need to do to move forward in enhancing participation. We want to make sure that we've not artificially put any kind of barriers in place that might limit someone's opportunity to engage in some of these really wonderful opportunities, particularly our young folks. And then finally, I have a calendar of upcoming events. We have our Fredericksburg Regional Job Fair coming up March 10th. That's really important to the school system with a shrinking pool of teacher applicants. It's important that we get out there as early as possible and try to attract folks to Stafford County, tell the story about why we would be the employer of choice if they're interested in moving into education. The school board and board supervisors will be at Head Start March 12th. I think it's a co-serving dinner. We have a really talented designer, a student designer at North Stafford High School who is going to be presented a VDOT award for the design of a new state license plate. And that will occur on March 16th. We would love to have any of the supervisors that might like to come and recognize our young person to come and celebrate that achievement. And then finally, we have our Stafford County Public Schools Honors Banquet on May 2nd. This is where we recognize our Teachers of the Year at Stafford High at 5 o'clock. We would love to have all of you attend if that is of interest to you. So finally, Mr. Cavalier made a comment or noted the weather forecast. So yeah, there's an interesting weather in the forecast again for this evening, but I just want to share a visit that I recently had to Margaret Brent Elementary School. We have a team of elementary students at Margaret Brent that are building their own weather station, and they're using a Raspberry Pi single circuit board, and they're programming it to collect weather information at the school. It's not fully operational yet, but I told them that once it becomes fully operational, perhaps they might want to join us on our 4:30 in the morning weather call and see how their data compares to the National Weather Service, Sterling, and our local experts. By the way, I very much appreciate everyone that participates in that call. That's a wonderful way for us to assess any danger or risk related to less than ideal weather. So with that, Madam Chair, that concludes my remarks. I'd be happy to try and respond to any questions the board may have.
Okay, does anybody have any questions for Dr. Benson? Okay, well, I have a couple. First, I thank you for the list of everything being printed out so that it's easy format if we can figure out if we want to attend. But I have a question because I was doing some research recently, and I'd just be curious what your progress is going to be or how you all might look at this, and are you going to be dealing with this in your budget process. So I was reading the reports because I know that you all had studied the programs that you mentioned recently, the CGS program, APPX, and the IB. So when you did an analysis, somebody went out and gathered a tremendous amount of data based on what the report said. And one was the CGS report was in September, the APPX was December 12th, and the IB was delivered to the school board or presented on November 14th. Just curious, where are you all going to go with those reports and that data that was presented to the school board?
So the board expressed an interest in wanting to get all three of the studies completed before we kind of brought them all together to determine what the next steps would be. And each one of the reports contains a number of recommendations or considerations for the board, but the board, I think, felt strongly that we wanted to look at them as a collective and not as individual programs. They all represent a different path for students that are headed to, more than likely some kind of college experience. They meet different needs, and we just want to ensure that as we look at the comprehensive nature of how these programs serve our students, that we take a look at them all together and consider the recommendations, because there are some recommendations that are similar across the three reports. So I anticipate that the board will be having a work session to take a look at those at some point in the near future. I will note that the board's primary focus right now is on the development of a funding request to bring to the board of supervisors. We have a work session scheduled on this Saturday, to do just that.
Okay, great. Any updates that you can give us along the way would be appreciated. And I'm very excited that you're doing the diverse new committee, because as you probably remember, Bob Thomas and I were very active in the Stafford County Multicultural Coalition and met with them, a number of times. And so it's very exciting that we're doing that on behalf of the community. So thank you so much for coming today.
Thank you.
Okay, Scott Majowski, I didn't see him in the audience. Could somebody give him a ring and let him know? Oh, there goes. Okay, in the meantime, we'll move right along to presentations by the public. At this meeting, the public has an opportunity to comment. There are no public meetings tonight. We have no public hearings tonight, so we do not have an evening session. If you'd like to comment, please remain courteous and respectful to the audience and to board members. It is also important for you to keep track of your time at the podium. The board would like to give all interested people a chance to speak. Try to stay on schedule so that we can ensure that everyone will have enough time to address the board. Each speaker is allowed 3 minutes to address the board. Speak into the microphone slowly, clearly, and loudly. Begin by stating your name and address. Please refer to the light on the podium to monitor the time of your presentation. Green indicates the start of your presentation. Yellow indicates that you have 1 minute to summarize your comments, and red indicates that your presentation time is complete. So, excuse me, at this point in time, do we have anyone that would like to speak to the board? I don't have any forms.
Paul Waldowski, 8 Pickett Lane. Whereas this board discourages citizens from speaking freely because you only give us 3 minutes, you put things in front of us so we have to sit there and wait. So I would recommend that you let citizens speak, because there's not many who are going to come here in the first place because of what I just said. Whereas Virginia is a commonwealth, it is not a state. So either decide which one it is. There are only 46 states in the United States, and there are 4 commonwealths. This is not the state of Virginia. Just go read the letterhead. Just some observations. Now, if you have school board questions, we can ask the expert. So guess what I'm going to ask them? Why are churches being used in our school system? I'll ask the expert. If you want to fulfill these reading gaps, I'd advise you to start letting people take Latin. I've said it many times before, the word Latin ends with "in" in it, just like the word brain does. And English only has "is" in it, as does Spanish. Oh, I'm of Polish heritage. We have an "is" in it too. But I know Latin will definitely help you with your reading gaps. Now, I went on a little field trip into the Hartwood district, and I went to be transparent to find out about these apartments that you can't buy. But guess what? You have to get a water and sewer bill. And I own an apartment for 29 years. I don't own it for 29 years. That's how long it's existed. And it doesn't get a water and sewer bill. Yes, I'll go see your utility commissioner and I'll tell him what I think of the utility commission, just like the Kreitzer dossier that was done many years ago. Now, for the citizens, you need to know that there are 3 GW districts, and the 6 of them are going to go in a back room and they're going to select someone to represent a GW district. That's the George Washington district, which is the gerrymandered part of the King George district. We know about the Griffiths Whitewater district, but you probably didn't know about the Garrisonville Woods district. That's where all the drug activity and other aspects happen. Now I got 8 seconds. Remember, I don't forget about that $1 million fire department. That's station number 14.
Thank you, Mr. Wadowski. Okay, at this time, we'll go back to the Commissioner of Revenue, Mr. Scott Mayeski. I think they're with him.
My apologies.
Mr. Mayeski, are the people that walked in right behind you, are they in your department? Oh, yeah.
Yes, they are.
Okay, we wanted to make sure they weren't from the public, that they might want to speak.
No, I believe I was practicing on some of them and was not ready for how
okay.
efficient your meeting was. So I
Thank
do
you.
apologize.
No problem.
And I would like to welcome Mr. Dudenheffer back and Ms. Shelton to the board.
Computer, please.
And I appreciate the opportunity to talk about the 2018 reassessment. And I prefer to have more of a conversation with you all than just talk at you. So if you have any questions, please feel free to stop me and we'll talk about them as I go through my presentation. In Virginia, we're legally required to reassess or revalue property on a regular basis. Virginia's very much considered a leader in property tax valuation in the entire country. It's because we have a constitutional requirement to assess property regularly and at 100% fair market value. This reassessment will be effective January 1, 2018, so all of the values that folks will soon receive in their reassessment notices are what we feel their property is worth on that day, January 1, 2018. In the notices, there's going to be information how to appeal your assessment. We encourage everyone to go online and file an appeal online. Help streamline the process, may prevent you from having to come in and actually sit down with us, but we're more than happy to sit down with anybody. State law requires us to have 15 days worth of hearings. We plan for at least 30, but we don't turn anybody away. We want to sit down with folks. We feel like it's a good opportunity to learn. A lot of folks want to come in and just learn how we determined our value, but we also learn information from the taxpayer. And we do change assessments. I know a lot of folks don't think that we do, but from time to time we do. And a lot of that is based on the information that we will learn during those hearings. There may be some things happening in a neighborhood or within a specific market that we weren't aware of or did not pick up on, or there may be a deficiency to a property that we didn't know. And that's your time to come to us and let us know that information so that we can get that value correct. Because once that value's set, it's set for 2 years, and that becomes the value that you pay taxes on. Virginia is considered a truth in taxation state. What that means is that nobody gets to play games with the reassessment. Once a reassessment is completed, the tax rate is automatically reset to a rate that will, in effect, offset the effects of that reassessment. So the easiest way to think about it is think of a scale. If the property values go up, then the rate comes down. And then conversely, typically if the values drop, then the rate will go up. So in the last 10 years, we've had a tax rate as low as 63 cents when the values were high right before the real estate bubble burst. And then once the bubble burst and those values dropped, our tax rate was over $1. So Stafford County never really saw a revenue windfall during that time because we are pretty well committed to keeping tax bills as flat as we can. But that rate had to adjust to account for the change in assessed values. So since we saw an increased values in this reassessment, you will see an effective rate lower than 99 cents, which I believe we'll talk about later during one of the budget presentations. A county the size of Stafford can reassess we have to reassess at least every 2 years. That is local option. We could go to an annual reassessment, but the board has, and I think it's a correct decision, has determined a 2-year cycle works well for Stafford. The state is serious about us assessing property accurately. They actually come in and audit us every year. They will send folks from the Department of Taxation, they will go to the clerk's office, and they will randomly pull a sample of sales. They will then look at our values and calculate an assessment to sale ratio. If that ratio falls below 70%, there are consequences. They can cut off some state funding, and the Department of Taxation can come in and require corrective measures on our part. We average about 92% of market value. The state also ties state corporation commission taxes, which are your public service corporations, Verizon, CSX. All that property is valued by the state, but then we get, the percentage of taxes we get is based upon how accurate our assessments are. So the more accurate, the more revenue that we get. The courts have charged us with two things. One is to determine the fair market value of the property, which is in the Constitution. The other is to be fair and equitable. We're not allowed to discriminate against anyone. If we cannot achieve both of those goals, they've determined it's more important to be equitable than it is to be accurate. So I always tell my folks it's okay to be wrong, just be consistently wrong. If there are large inequities between neighborhoods, a court can come in, throw out the entire reassessment, and order a new one. So the purpose of the reassessment is not to generate additional revenue, and the effective tax rate pretty much guarantees that you won't. You might generate a little bit more just off the reassessment, but not much. The purpose of the reassessment is to redistribute the tax burden. The real estate market changes constantly. Some neighborhoods are trendy and popular one year and values are high, and some neighborhoods they're not. The reassessment allows us to account for those changes to make sure that everybody's paying their fair share in taxes. The revenue is actually generated through the tax rate. Now, there are certainly cases, especially in neighborhoods where values are increasing at a rapid rate, where even if you keep the rate the same, the tax bill is going to go up. Send those folks to us. We're happy to talk to them. And when your phone rings, don't feel like you ever have to defend our assessed values. Please send those folks to us. We're more than happy to sit down and talk to those folks. So our last reassessment was 2016. It is now 2018. Just a little snapshot of what the market has done in that time period. Residential values have increased by 9%, commercial by 5%. I think the big number that jumps out at everybody is multifamily has gone up 34%. That is a big number, but that number skewed a little bit because we really don't have a lot of multifamily. And I'm just making this number up for an example. If you have 4 apartment complexes and you build a 5th, you've just gone up 20%. So that number's not quite as alarming as it appears on the page. Total tax base has increased by 9%. If you exclude new construction, you're looking at about a 5% increase in existing homes. Now, that's just an average. There are some homes that will go up much more than that, and there are some homes that will not go up at all. It all depends upon what's happening in your marketplace and in your neighborhood. The composition of the tax base, 18% of our tax base is now commercial, which means 82% is residential. The total value of Stafford County, total taxable value is $17.5 billion. Now, this next slide will help illustrate, when I say we redistribute the tax burden, this will help illustrate what I mean by that.
Mr. Dombrowski?
Yes.
Quick question, and I don't know if it's you or Mr. Foley. I know we have a goal, it's an 80-20 goal, isn't it, that we're looking for residential to commercial, as far as values? I think I've seen it in previous budget documents, and I'm asking you for historical information that you might not have, sir, so I'm sorry for putting you on the spot.
I would just mention that setting some kind of standard like that is pretty typical. We are evaluating that right now, and
Okay.
there is an 80-20 standard. I think the question is, what all is included in that? Some properties sometimes shift from one to the other, so I would want to speak with the commissioner a little bit more about that first.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's, you didn't ask for my opinion, but I'm going to give it to you. I think it's, it's probably more accurate and more appropriate to look at more than just the real estate base to create that standard. We actually work with the budget office to create a spreadsheet that looks at all of the business taxes and compares it to the total revenue base. And the real estate base is just one piece of the pie. And it's a very volatile piece of the pie. If you look at 2006 here, which was the height of the real estate market, our commercial property was only 12% of the base. Didn't mean we didn't have a lot of commercial property. It's just that the value of the residential increased at such a dramatic rate, and I know you're familiar with commercial real estate. It can't increase at a rapid rate, or everybody would go out of business because they couldn't afford to pay their leases. So the value of the residential really determines what percentage of your base is commercial. Our commercial base is steady, chugging along, going up, but it's a steady, consistent chug. So I think if you take a broader picture of all the commercial bases or taxes, that will give you a more accurate picture. But if you look at 2006, we were down as low as 12%. And if you go to 2012, all of a sudden we're back up to 20%. We've hit the 80-20. But commercials changed, but not that dramatically. What changed was the residential. If we did not reassess property at a regular rate, we wouldn't be able to reflect that change in the market. If we only reassess, say, every 10 years, Pennsylvania, they reassess, it takes decades to reassess. If your bench year was 2006, then you would always be overcharging your residential properties in terms of taxes. That 8% difference between 2006 and 2012 accounts for over $10 million of actual tax revenue that was shifted from the residences to the commercial. So that's the general purpose of the reassessment, to make sure that you can reflect the trends in the market. This just shows you our tax base since 2010. We are, believe it or not, still recovering from the market crash. We're just now reaching the 2006 levels of our tax base. In 2010, we were as low as 12.5%. As I mentioned, we're now 12.5 billion. We're now 17.5 billion. So we've gained $5 billion worth of value over that 8-year period.
Mr. Mayeski?
Yeah.
But part of that is with growth.
Part of that is with growth, correct.
And do you happen to know, and I know I'm asking for kind of a statistical, do you know how much of that is growth? So how much of the value have we actually regained, and then how much is additional growth?
That's a great question. I don't know the answer to that, but I'm gonna figure that out, because now I'm curious about that.
Thank you.
It's typical to assume about 2% growth a year. It used to be a lot higher than that, but the base is just so big now it's hard to move it more than that. But I'll figure that out, and I'll let you know. You're welcome. Okay, so here's what we can expect, or you all can expect coming up. As you see, we finalized our values in January, and we do that because we track sales all the way through December. If there's a change in the market, we want to be able to reflect that. A last-minute change in the market, we want to be able to reflect that. Notices are going to be mailed February 15th, so you will probably get emails and phone calls. Like I said, please feel free to funnel them to me. Appeals will begin immediately thereafter. It takes about 2 days for mail to hit PO boxes, and our phones will start ringing, and we'll start having folks in then. We'll try and wrap up appeals in early April as we wait for you all to set the tax rate. How the process works is once we have the values final, we wait for you to set the rate. When you set the rate, we make the calculation to determine how much people owe. That's what we refer to as the bill file. We then hand that bill file to the treasurer. She prints the bills and mails them. The state law only requires 15 days before tax bills are due, that they have to be mailed 15 days before they're due. In Stafford, folks have gotten accustomed to the 30 days. And if they're not on the 29th day, they'll start calling and asking where their tax bill is. So it's important that we have that rate set in April so that we can get those bills out as close to May 5th as we can. And of course, tax bills are due on June 5th. This is my direct number and my contact information. Also the reassessment office, if anybody wants to call and set up an appointment or have any questions. That's all that I had.
Mr. Dudenheffer.
Mr. Majowski.
Yes, sir.
It's good to be back. We are constantly bombarded, or you hear in the press, about how politicians and people in positions like us get favorable treatment and we're getting rich and everything. Would you please explain the process that you use to make sure that that does not happen?
Yes, that's a great question. We have paid special attention to every single one of your assessments. We actually pull them and we look at them in context of your neighborhood and make sure that everything is the way it should be. So we are very sensitive to that, and folks will come in and look at your assessments. More likely, they're going to go online and look at your assessments, but they are checking up on you all, and we make sure that there are no mistakes. If any of you all own businesses, you probably know, I don't know that I contacted any of you all, but usually even if somebody's running for office, we will contact them, make sure that everything is squared away in terms of their business taxes, because the last thing we want is anybody accusing any of you all or us of providing favorable treatment, because we just don't operate that way here. Did that
answer my question?
Did that help?
That did, thank you.
Does anybody, Ms. Shelton?
Mr. Majowski, I have a question for you. When you talked about the reassessments, are those done completely within your staff, or do you hire external people to help you with that?
That's a great question. We're now the second largest county in the state that still has the reassessment in-house under the Commissioner of Revenue. A lot of the other localities will hire people to come in and do them. We do it all in-house, and it takes a full 2-year process. So as soon as we're done with appeals in this cycle, our folks are going to be out in neighborhoods collecting data. A lot of mass appraisal is statistical analysis, so if you have bad data, you get bad values. Then the next year, the year before, which would be what, 2019, we're going to really start looking at all the sales that occur in neighborhoods and market areas and applying the appropriate adjustments to those properties to account for what's happening within the market, but it's all done in-house.
And I wanted to thank you for raising my taxes. I now know it's fair.
You will thank me later.
Okay, no more questions from the board. I have a question about when the Department of Taxation comes in your office and does a sampling.
Yes.
Is it like auditors that plant themselves there for 3 days, 3 weeks, or are they there for a half a day, an hour? How extensive is their?
It's a several day. So there's actually 2 audits that occur. One occurs with the State Corporation Commission. They will come and sit down with us usually in February, and they'll pull 4 months worth of sales, and they'll set up shop in our office for 2 or 3 days, and they'll run those sales and create spreadsheets and do all of that. The Department of Taxation does another study which encompasses an entire year, and in those, we actually provide them that data. We send that data down to Richmond, and then they will calculate the values from those assessments. So it's combination of, it's very, the State Corporation Commission is very similar to an in-house audit.
Okay. All right,
Yeah.
great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. Okay, and now we're going to move on to board reports, and I'll just remind board members, if you'd like to pull anything from the consent agenda, just make sure you mention that at the end of your comments.
Mr. Dudenhofer?
We held our first 2018 Infrastructure Committee meeting earlier today. I lost the coin toss and was elected chairman of that committee, and literally that's how it happened. But it's really a pleasure to work in that area because I think it's one of the most important areas and where we're certainly deficient and delinquent in keeping up with the growth that we have. So we have some very important decisions that have to be made there. There's some prioritizations that have to be made that are very important for the future. And we started addressing those this afternoon. The most important thing I think that's going on right now is that we are in a short time frame to address or to participate in the Smart Scale project, which is how we rate or we apply for money from the state. It's graded on the projects and then divvied out based on how much money is available in certain areas. And there are quite a few criteria for that. We're in the process of using the information that we've collected over time. We have a lot of data that talks about the roads that need to be improved, and we're diligently trying to work through that. But in addition to that, we've also created a working group who is going to now look at every aspect of the transportation issue in the county. Congestion, safety, number of other specific criteria. And we hope at that point to be able to come up with a list in Stafford County that has hard data that shows us which are the most important roads that need work. And in the meantime, we'll be trying to find out where we can get some additional funding. Roads are very expensive, and we're going to continue to work with that. But certainly our road and infrastructure is important. We have issues with courthouses, with school buildings and construction. All of those things have to be racked and stacked and decided what we can afford, what we can't afford, how we phase those things in. So I know I talk infrastructure a lot when I'm out about the community. I want everyone to know that that is an extremely important issue for this board. Every single board member I talk to, when you talk about them, that's a critical important issue right now, and we're going to put a lot of time and attention into trying to do it the best we possibly can for the citizens of Stafford County. So that's the end of my report, ma'am.
Thank you.
Mrs. Maurer?
Alrighty, attended several different meetings since the last 2 weeks. First, the Legislative Committee. Mr. Dudenhofer and I are regularly meeting every Friday to discuss how track the bills that are going through the process. All of the bills that were on our legislative agenda are doing quite well this year. Very excited about that. There's one issue that is going to be of extreme importance that's moving like a freight train through the General Assembly that we as a county oppose, and it's the wireless infrastructure bill. Essentially, they'll be able to put up infrastructure on any of our county properties, to include schools, and we have very little say on that. So one of the things that Mr. Dudenhofer and I have asked is that if and when this bill passes, because it looks like it's moving like a freight train, that we be provided a report to this board about the implications of that particular bill, both on our county properties, and we're offering that same report up to the school board as well. I also attended the Joint Schools Working Committee, and our new chair, Ms. Shelton, will provide an update on that meeting. Congratulations, Ms. Shelton. Attended the PRTC meeting. I was elected as treasurer, and now as the new full-time member on that committee. Last couple of years, I was an alternate. One of the concerns that I have is this fiscal cliff I keep hearing about, both with PRTC and the VRE. So I will be bringing back regular reports to this body on where we stand on those. In addition to that, one of the important elements that we discovered, and I want to thank staff for this, is they came to the PRTC committee and we supported a slight budget change, and they said it's budget neutral. Well, it wasn't a funding neutral change, and Stafford got stuck with a little bit more of a bill than we had expected. So I can tell you that we're going to be keeping a watchful eye out for that. I also attended the Telecommunications Commission meeting last night. Very excited about the Viasat satellite that was launched, and Stafford County and all of our rural areas are going to start seeing some marketing of satellite services that are pretty comparable to cable services and for a pretty comparable price. More importantly, Viasat just launched this satellite back in June, July timeframe, but they have another one that is 7 times more powerful in, getting ready to launch within the next 10 years. So for our rural communities, which I have a lot in my district, this is pretty exciting news because we're not going to be able to run the cable out to our rural communities just due to density. So there are viable alternatives that are coming to Stafford County. Also was elected chair of the CEDC, that's the Community Economic Development Committee meeting, and at that meeting we talked about the groundwater study. This was something that Mr. Snellings became very passionate about last year. We've got some issues in the west of 95, and the results of that study are kind of mixed. Mr. Snellings and I will be continuing to work together, and a final report will be brought before this board very soon. In addition to that, both Mr. Snellings and I will be hosting town halls in our respective districts to let people know about the results of the groundwater study that came out. We're also talking about changing an ordinance for submission requirements for electronic plan review as our planning department gets more and more online. This will be easier for both our businesses and our residences to submit and track their plans and the approval process online. Also talked about the transfer of development rights for Crow's Nest Harbor. This one is interesting. We have a transfer of development rights program where we can in the harbor area, they can transfer their development rights into areas inside the urban service area. Both of them are very specific, and we've asked for a little bit more information on what the legal ramifications are on that. All in all, great news. And finally, the soapbox derby discussion. Mr. Snellings was asked that to be put on the Community and Economic Development Committee meeting. And we discussed maybe going into partnership with both Fredericksburg and Spotsylvania to try to keep a long-standing Stafford tradition alive. Finally, I want to let you know that I've got a couple of upcoming town halls. One of them is going to discuss the results of the groundwater study, and I will be meeting with Augustine and Vista Woods soon. I've got some interesting traffic calming options available to them. And Madam Chair, I would like to pull item 5 from the consent agenda. That concludes my report.
Thank you.
Ms. Shelton?
I too have attended an amazing amount of meetings. So I'm going to leave out the items that I've done jointly with other people. As Ms. Maurer mentioned, I'm now the co-chair for the Joint Schools Working Committee. I'm very excited about that because we actually share that. And so the school board, which is Ms. Decatur, she's the co-chair, so we alternate back and forth on where those meetings are going to be. One of the things that she proposed that I thought was pretty exciting is a program for new firefighters and bringing in firefighters from our high schools into our volunteer programs to train them with the intention of moving them into a VOTEC kind of a situation and making them more aware of our community needs. Thought that was pretty good. By the way, we'd like people to attend that. Our next meeting is going to be on March 5th, if you guys want to put that on our calendar. Some other things that were shared at the same time were we looked at some of the data for the early childhood education program. That's really important for us because, on the board, that's a huge cost. And we want to make sure that we're doing the right thing for the community and we're prepared for what that looks like going forth in that enrollment projections. Another part that we have a lot of conversations about now, and I see several, Scott, Mr. Hirons, thank you for being here. And Haran, dang it, I'm so sorry. I will get it right eventually. Anyway, thank you very much. We're having conversations about understanding how we build the cost structure for what we need in our joint CIP process. And as a new member, it's very, very important for me to understand that. Dr. Chase is participating with me on that. And if there's anything to be shared, then please come to my roundtable that I have on the third Thursday of every month. And it's at 7 o'clock, and it's at the library. I'm so sorry, it's not at the library, it is at the hospital, and downstairs at the hospital. And what's nice about it, I had my very first one, only 15 people came, which was really kind of a nice size, but the group that was there shared a lot of their concerns, and then they jointly decided that they wanted to keep that in-house and not share it with you guys. So that's your opportunity, though. And the intent of this meeting is to have conversations with everyone that's out in the community, and staff is not going to be there, and it's in a very common location that's easy to get to. And Starbucks is open at that time. So that's important to me. Another thing that I wanted to mention, too, is I went to the England Run Library and did a review of the library system. I was very impressed with that. That is the library that's soon to be called the Howell Library. I was really glad to see them get their proclamation today because they really deserve it. The final thing, in addition to all the other meetings that I've attended, is I personally went out and visited with Alternative Paths Training School. It's one of the schools that we send some of our students to that have significant issues that we want to get in front of. Shout out to them. That's a really hard job. And it's a really hard job for our schools to be able to identify these individuals and triage them for those that need that additional support. So thank you very much, Stafford County, for having those kind of alternatives. That's it, ma'am.
Thank you.
Mr. Snellens.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Just real briefly, one of our speakers got up today talking about the way we're going to choose a new supervisor for the George Washington District. Just want to let the public know that what we're doing is that we're following Virginia law. Once Mr. Thomas resigned his seat here to go to the House of Delegates on the 10th day of January, we have 45 days by law to appoint someone. If we don't do that, the circuit judge appoints. So we are diligently working towards getting that appointment done quickly. The other thing is we have to do is set a special election, which we have done. That will be on November the 6th, same time as the general election. So everything we're doing, this process is laid out by Virginia law, and we're working very hard to make sure that seat down there at the end is filled by the February the 20th meeting, because we want somebody from the George Washington District representing them on this board very quickly. Last thing is, I did attend the Empower House fundraiser early in the month, a great event. About 300 people showed up. It's called the Empty Bowl, kind of unique. You actually get an empty bowl, and you've got about 25 different varieties of soup and chili that you can choose from. So really a good event. I was glad to be there. Thank you.
Mr. Cavalier
I'll defer any comments.
and Ms. Bumpke.
Yes, I just want to say, Mr. Snellings and I, we attended a presentation at Station 12, which is the Berea station, and we received a $400 donation from Stafford Rotary for a rope gun that they can use out on the river to help with drowning victims. And Carol Foley from the Stafford Rotary Club presented the check. And they've done a lot of donations to Stafford County for public safety, so a thank you to them. Along with many board members here, I attended the Chamber Gala, which is always a fun event, and Life Care, who resides in Stafford County out in the Hartwood District, and the YMCA both received awards that evening. I too attended the Empower House Empty Bowl, and as Gary said, that's always a great event, and that's to support domestic violence in our region. The Chatham Bridge public hearing was held at VDOT. I attended that, and I will just say that we are working on maybe some changes with VDOT to add a sidewalk here or there based on some comments that were presented at that meeting. I had a town hall meeting over at Pleasant Valley regarding the rezoning of the property there, and didn't have that many people attend, but it was a good, productive conversation. And I would just say that the citizens there do want to move forward with that project, but they only want 3 houses there, and they want it in the deed of trust. So, and they don't want any townhomes. So that will be coming back to the board at some point. George Washington Regional Commission, our search committee, met, and we approved the entire process for advertising and evaluating the executive director's position. We're going to be reviewing candidate applications in March. Interviews will be in April and May, and we hope to have someone in place by June 1 to have a 30-day overlap with the current executive director, Tim Ware, who is retiring June 30th. Lastly, and very important, received an email from the Chamber of Commerce today regarding the potential, well, the move of 150 to 175 highly compensated individuals from the chemical, biological, radiological, that's a lot of, CBR is the acronym, from Dahlgren out to Indian Head in Maryland. And some of you on the board know that I've been working with Rob Whitman and with Ruby Bravo, the King George chairman of the board, to just try to find out why are these jobs really getting moved to Indian Head and why they're moving the CBR division. We've been asking for answers to this since last summer, and finally received an email that actually came from the technical director from Dahlgren this morning. It's been a very frustrating process, and we're still not sure that we agree that it helps their mission, but you know, it's a military decision, but we're not too happy about that. But I just wanted to bring the board up to date. Thank you, and at this point in time, we'll move on to the report of the Deputy County Administrator, Ms. McClendon. County Attorney, thank you.
That's fine, Madam Chairman, I have no report at this time.
And Mr. Foley, our County Administrator.
Madam Chair, I don't have any comments except just to express my gratitude for the support of the board and county staff for a recent loss in my family. I just wanted you all to know how much I appreciate that and how meaningful it is. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, and with that, we'll move right on to the consent agenda. Is there a motion to approve the consent?
Motion to approve?
Yeah, minus item 5. Okay, a second. Any discussion? Cast your vote. Tally the vote. Motion passes unanimously. Ms. Mauer, item number 5.
Madam Chair, I pulled this item from the agenda just because it's a large decision, a weighty decision, and looks to establish what we're looking for in our next budget. And I believe that we need to have a little bit more information from staff on this for the public's benefit.
Okay. All right, any discussion?
Madam Chair, may I just clarify that those items, of course, came out of discussion at the board retreat and will primarily provide guidance for 5-year projecting, but I certainly would agree with the idea that that's a significant work. So we can come back with perhaps more explanations and background on those items, things that probably were discussed at the retreat, but would be better for the public to see more of sort of the alternatives that you looked at and so forth. So we will plan on doing that.
That'd be wonderful. Thank you.
That would be great. So, Madam Chair, I'd like to defer this item until our next meeting.
All right, is there a second?
Second.
All right, any discussion? Cast your vote for a deferral of item number 5. Tally the vote. Motion passes unanimously. Okay, and I'd just like to say that we just approved John Eves to the Airport Authority, and he happens to be here in the audience, so just like to recognize he and his wife, Jackie. So thank you for your willingness to serve in this volunteer capacity, and I'm sure the Airport Authority will enjoy working with you. Thank you.
Our condolences, too.
Okay, and moving right along to unfinished business is item number 11. Finance and budget, budget and appropriate capital project reserve funds. Proposed resolution R18-24. This will be finance and budget. Miss Andrea Light will be making a short presentation.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen of the board. As we go through these items, would you like me to just go through them with you?
Well, we saw these at the last meeting. Does anybody have any questions for Miss Light?
Ms. Light, can you just explain the minor changes from the last meeting to this meeting? It looks like we have removed the CAD system for 250,000. I've got two questions on that. Number one, do we have enough that we can approve that later, so we're not spending all of our cash? That's critically important to me, and I understand that IT is still ensuring that it is in alignment with all of our other IT systems, and I do appreciate the due diligence on that. And number two, can you explain the Telegraph Road? Is this related to the light, the temporary light?
Yes. So there is sufficient money in the capital projects reserve if this item of $250,000 for the fire and rescue is deferred until later time. It's my understanding fire and rescue will be bringing this CAD system back after it's fully vetted with IT at the public safety meeting, possibly at the end of this month, and the board can choose at that time to budget and appropriate if they choose to let the contract. For the other item, which is the Telegraph Road, it's the light at the Telegraph Road. So we are getting ready to do all the VDOT, to do the contracts with VDOT and get that that process in place. And this is the remaining funding that we need to provide to do that.
All righty, and I want to congratulate Mr. Cavalier for getting that through VDOT. I know you've worked very hard on that, so good to see it here on the agenda.
Just to clarify that a little further, we did have a set amount that we put in as our cost sharing to the state on this, and it came from the Whitewater Special Service District. And we did some refunds after we had committed this money, and so the $155,000 represents the amount of refunds that were done to property owners along that proposed route that paid those taxes and wanted their money back. So that's why this is here today.
All right. All right, with no other questions, thank you, Ms. Light. Bring it back to the board. Is there a motion for R18-24?
Second.
Okay. Any more discussion? Cast your vote. Tally the vote. Motion passes unanimously. Okay, item 12, Public Works. Authorize additional full-time equivalent positions for Public Works. Proposed resolution R18-25. Mr. Dayton.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Members of the board, Keith Dayton, Interim Director of Public Works. This matter was before the board at the January 23rd meeting. It involves adding two positions to Public Works. One would be a commercial plan reviewer, and the other would be a senior building inspector. That day, it was brought before the Finance, Audit, and Budget Committee. There were questions asked about the ability of the projected revenues to fund this position. There is a table in your background report that was added that addresses that matter. We are expecting about $207,000 additional revenue this current fiscal year to fund those two positions. At the board meeting, there were some questions about the impacts on the Public Works Department from not having these positions. We added some information to the background report. Essentially, with the increase in commercial plan reviews, we are seeing our building official picking up the slack, basically spending a lot of their time doing plan reviews, assisting with plan reviews, instead of performing other functions that we would prefer our building official to be dedicated towards. With respect to the building inspector, we're finding that our deputy building official who oversees the building inspection group, they are picking up a lot of inspections themselves. I think it was 584 to date in this current fiscal year, and then they are personally involved with addressing citizen concerns. We would never look to take that fully away from the deputy building official. They are the deputy building official because they understand the business, so they always are involved with citizen concerns, always have been in our department, but we would like to see them be able to delegate away some of the simpler matters and allow themselves then to focus on other matters that are helpful to that group as a whole. So that's essentially the change and the additional information that we provided. Other than that, the package before you is essentially the same.
Any questions? Ms. Shelton?
Mr. Dayton, in the table that you provided, there is a fixed price on interdepartment transfer. I know it's not totally related to these new positions. Can you explain that?
Well, over the last few years, it has been a decision to hold that amount constant. It's a contribution from the Department of Public Works to various other agencies throughout the county. And there have been times in the past where that goes up or goes down. In this particular case, for the last few years, it's just a decision to hold it constant.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Mauer?
Okay, I asked that this be pulled from the agenda last time and brought back before with numbers, and seeing these numbers, I was rightfully concerned. We're looking at the building department and the inspections and the fees that we charge as an enterprise fund, and so when I look at the revenues and the expenses that are generated, because I do remember in the last budget season, we had added not only additional people, but additional technology to the building department, because in fiscal year 2017, we had a massive positive cash flow in that particular department. And so, but I'm concerned that if we're going to treat this like an enterprise fund, it looks like fiscal year 2018 is, number one, has gone down in $200,000 in revenue, is what we're projecting, while costs have gone up by $400,000, which kind of makes up for the additional technology and the people that we added during the last budget season, giving us a positive cash flow of about $200,000. My concern here is that part of that 2018 had to do with dealing with a lot of the proffer bill residual work that we had, which was, and also the fact that our board was changing and they had a different posture with relation to residential rezoning requests. I will approve this because I do feel for your department, but I'm approving this with a caveat. One of the things when I first got on the board that Mr. Romanella told me was the hardest thing he had to do, and that was lay people off. And so what I don't want to do is set you up and set this staff up and set people up that we bring into Stafford County for future layoffs if this now turns into a negative, because you guys are telling me that this is an enterprise fund. And yes, fiscal year 2017 was a banner year, and we have a lot of money in that department in 17, but 18 isn't proving out to be true, and we're seeing a downward trend, and we have a different posture on this board. So I will approve it with a significant amount of concern in that we may put ourselves in a position that we would have to lay these people off. And this is why I don't like to approve new positions outside of a budget year. So it has nothing to do with the hard work that your department has, but it has everything to do with making good fiscal decisions and setting this county up for success. And you, Mr. Dayton, you are very important to me.
Madam Chair.
I think excuse me.
Go ahead.
Mr. Foley?
Madam Chair, I was going to say that we can follow up on those comments during the budget process and do a little deeper dive on our projections for staffing and needs as we look at growth.
Mr. Cavalier?
So, Madam Chair, just to follow protocol, I'll go ahead and move for R 18-25 at this time.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any more discussion?
Yes. I just wanted to point out that Mr. Snellings and I went to the regional meeting with the local builders and realtors and a lot of other parts of that industry, encompassed engineers and the financiers and the whole gamut of the building industry around here. And that was one of the things they pointed out, was that the amount of time it took to get plans approved and inspections done. And if you focus that on commercial, is what this is doing, adding these positions to that end of the business here, by us getting things done faster, it really helps us in terms of economic development. And I think this is an area where everyone recognizes that we have fallen short in especially the time period it takes to get plans approved and buildings inspected. And the whole time we're doing this, and we're losing tax revenue. So I think that point was abundantly clear. They told us a number down there that Gary and I hadn't heard before, but they said government regulations add about 25% of the cost of all new building. And that, if you think of it that way, that's substantial in terms of the price of a house or even a commercial building. And so I think we've got to look at ways to start trimming these costs. And I think, are we over-regulating? I believe we are. I think that we need to start streamlining more and getting things done so that we can develop economically versus hinder.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Cavalier. Okay, we have a motion and we have a second. Who is the second? Cindy, thank you. Okay, any more discussion? All right, cast your vote. Tally the vote. Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Okay, next item is item 13. Consider an amendment to the zoning ordinance to allow drive-through facilities with a conditional use permit in certain zoning districts. Mr. Harvey.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. This is a carryover from your last meeting. At the last meeting, we had a public hearing that discussed the current situation where drive-through facilities are limited to our highway corridors, which are our primary roads within the county. If someone wanted to establish a drive-through facility associated with a bank, a restaurant, or a pharmacy, outside of those primary transportation corridors, they could not do so. So in July, the board discussed this in their Community Economic Development Committee and thought it was important for us to allow drive-throughs to be located elsewhere in the county. The recommendation at that time was to move forward with a conditional use permit because that's how they are currently allowed within our highway corridor overlay zones. We had the public hearing with the Planning Commission and the hearing with the board at the last meeting. At that meeting, Ms. Shelton raised the question as to what do our peer localities require for this type of activity. And there's a chart within the background report. Basically, of our 6 peer localities, 3 of them allow the drive-through facilities as a by right activity with performance standards. The other 3 localities require them to go through a special exception process with the Board of Zoning Appeals, and there are also performance standards. The special exception process would be similar to a conditional use permit in that the BZA could establish certain development conditions. Staff would note that we do have some performance standards already in the code regarding vehicle stacking lanes for drive-throughs. We also have standards in the Highway Corridor Overlay District that deal with the orientation of the drive-throughs and screening of the headlights towards traffic. But we'll note that if we go with a by right type of activity for drive-throughs, then we could not regulate architecture. And in this past summer, there was some discussion at the board CEDC committee that architecture was important to the county and how businesses look. So that was part of the rationale as to why to go forward with a conditional use permit. Staff would note if the board wants to change direction and go away from a conditional use permit to a special exception or a by right stance with regard to drive-through facilities, that would require us to go back through the ordinance review process.
Okay, any questions?
Mr. Harvey, how many drive-throughs have we actually turned down in the last 10 years? And I know you've done this research, so I'm not.
Ms. Mauer, I'm not aware of any that have been turned down. Usually, those are things that, as we go through the review process, we somewhat negotiate with the applicant. With a conditional use permit, the county is actually imposing conditions on that operation, and usually they have a generalized development plan, and that shows the configuration of the property and configuration of the building. We often negotiate with them about the location of the drive-through window and any landscaping or screening that they have to do to try to minimize impacts.
Okay.
Any other questions for Mr. Harvey?
Yes,
Yes,
Mr.
Ms.
Harvey.
Shelton.
Related to your question, Ms. Mauer, is on those properties that have had or doing drive-throughs, how many of those are the only thing that they have to get a conditional use permit is the drive-through?
Ms. Shelton, that's the case in every situation, because you have to have the base zoning for commercial use to begin with. So usually, the only thing they need as far as a discretionary approval is this conditional use permit.
Yeah, how much is a conditional use permit?
The base fee for most conditional use permits start at around $10,000. Sometimes with conditional use permits, they also have to do a traffic impact analysis, provide the county with some architectural design and some other things. So the cost to the applicant can probably be in excess of $20,000 to go through that public hearing process.
So if there was a performance standard, i.e. stacking lanes and whatnot, would any sort of traffic impact analysis be required?
Ms. Mauer, in most cases, a traffic study would not be required because we default to the VDOT standard, and it's going to be much higher than the traffic generated from a single business.
Okay, thank you.
So, sorry, I didn't say that I was going to talk. Mr. Harvey, what my concern is that I don't see that there's a lot of value to having a conditional use permit separate, that it seems like in looking at our peer communities, at least 3 of them have found ways to be able to assuage whatever their concerns are by putting in those performance standards. And so I'm just wondering, why would we require that? Why would we ask somebody to go through an additional $20,000 that frankly a small business person could be using for other purposes to gain revenue?
Ms. Shelton, giving some past history about how the county's zoning evolved over time. When we created the highway corridor overlay zones, or I should say the board created the highway corridor overlay zones in the mid-1990s, there was a lot of concern about how future development would play out, and the board wanted to have some more control about that. So that's how the conditional use permit mechanism was put in place, because items have to go through the planning commission, have to go through the board, and get community input. And that was sort of the genesis of that. Also, too, the architectural standards, because at the time the board was concerned about typical franchise architecture and do we want to look like someplace different than every other place in the United States.
My concern is really those small businesses. And so I would be interested in seeing a proposal that would allow the by right with those performance standards that would meet the requirements that we all feel, that would allow us to be able to avoid the conditional use permit and put those structures in place, including the TIA. I don't know that we need that, but if you guys feel that we need to have that traffic impact analysis to whatever it is, whatever those conditions are, I think it might be in our interest rather than paving a cow path. I'm sorry if I'm using that term. Paving a cow path is like, we've been doing it like this for so long, it really kind of makes sense. And this gives us the opportunity to look at it differently if that's the right thing to do.
Okay, anybody else from the board want to weigh in on this item? Mr. Snellings?
Do we need a motion first before we make comments, I think? To
Okay.
defer or to,
Madam Chair, I'm going to make a motion to approve this, and I don't agree with it in its entirety. However, it is expanding where we can put drive-throughs. And so I'm going to make a motion to approve this. However, I do want us to go back and address some of Ms. Shelton's concerns.
I'll second.
All right, for discussion, if Mr. Harvey, if you could stay there for just a second.
And then I would,
So did this item come up through a committee?
Yes, Madam Chairman, it came up through the Community Economic Development Committee.
Okay.
We've had over a number of years concerns from the development community about our CUP process with specifically restaurants and pharmacies.
Okay. So I'm going to, so in the event the board moves this item forward with the expectation that some of the items that Ms. Shelton would like incorporated, do you think that's possible?
Well, Madam Chairman, I think we'd have to go with two tracks. One, this is
Right.
sort of a temporary measure, and then two, if the board is inclined to work for either a special exception or a by right, then we'd have to establish what those performance standards are, make them uniform, and maybe even have to delete some of them from the highway corridor overlay zone so we don't have conflicts.
Okay, so do you believe this is a good interim step?
Yes, ma'am. It does expand the capability for the county or people that want to locate drive-throughs in the county. And not certain how long it may take us to get through that process to make it by right. So that gives an interim process right now for that purpose.
All right, Mr. Snellings?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I always get very nervous when people use those two words, by right. Because when they say by right, it takes authority, it takes all oversight away from this board, basically. I don't have an issue with what Ms. Shelton wants to do, but I think we need to go ahead and pass this, so we'll have a stopgap. And then if we come back and set certain standards that would ensure that we're not going to end up with something we don't want to end up with, I don't have a problem doing that. So I'll vote for this and entertain anything that comes to the future.
Mr. Cavalier?
Yeah, I think Ms. Shelton's comments just went hand in hand with what I was saying about the government over-regulation. I mean, this is a classic example here. You know, why should somebody have to pay $20,000 to get a conditional use permit for a small business? That doesn't make a lot of sense to me. We should be able to outline what procedures need to be followed, what parameters there are, and make it clearly defined instead of causing people all this angst and heartburn of going through the planning commission, public hearings, and then us. And it's a lot of rigmarole, and you know, we always approve them anyhow. So why do this?
Ms. Maurer?
So last year, I brought before the CEDC a consideration in order to change the way we're doing our drive-throughs, because we are adding $10,000 bare minimum, $20,000 staff time, so we have to have additional staff members in order to get through the process. And I had a long talk with Mr. Harvey, and he had indicated that we have never denied a drive-through in the last 10 years, which is why I asked you that question. This is one of those areas where we are hindering commercial growth, and where I would agree with Mr. Cavalier and some of the sentiments that I've heard from our business owners all throughout Stafford County. And so I'm encouraged by Ms. Shelton's comments here, because she is correct. And a year ago, the board was a different board. But I do believe that we should look at performance standards, ensure that we are still, we're not hurting ourselves or creating any unintended consequences. But with the drive-throughs, I just do not see why we need to be different than all of our peer localities and require a conditional use permit. So thank you.
All right, and I'd just like to say I agree with everything that my colleague said, and I won't repeat it. So with that, please cast your vote for O18-08. Thank you, Mr. Harvey. Tally the vote. Motion passes with 1 against. Thank you.
Madam Chair, on that last item, and I think the comments Mr. Cavalier made and that you all are supporting, they really are so tied into the development review process and the concerns that you hear. And I think it's even broader than that. We should take a look at the things like this, that we have a process that is costly and timely. County staff get criticized for the time they take doing these reviews, but it is the sentiment of the board in past years that has driven legislative rather than a ministerial process that does add time and cost and so forth. So I know that staff, with the effort last year with the Development Review Committee, had identified ordinance changes. And I think this is a great example of those one of those things you'll have to consider. But we'll be working on that and perhaps trying to identify other ones like this that might be low-hanging fruit to improve that process and bring those back before you maybe in a more comprehensive way as well.
Okay, that
Thank you.
sounds great. Thank you for your leadership on that.
Ms. Momke?
Yes, Ms.
I
Shelton.
just have a question for you. What do we do to ensure that we do go back and address it?
It goes on CEDC.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right, thank you.
Okay, moving right along, item number 14, authorize the county administrator to execute a contract for facilities condition assessment services. And I see Mr. Morris coming down to the podium.
Madam Chair, members of the board, Mike Morris, Director of Parks, Recreation, and Community Facilities. This item is a contract to do a facility assessment of all county facilities and then also software to do long-range asset management planning. Since your last meeting, our Information Technology Department has reviewed the software and deemed that it meets their specifications and standards and has told us that we were good to move forward. So we brought it back to you today.
Okay, does anybody have any questions for Mr. Morris? So I have one. How can we rest assured, and the taxpayers rest assured, that this doesn't sit on a shelf in a binder?
Well, actually, this will be used, the information we get will be used to build our future CIP. So everything that we do in the future CIP, this will give us a current assessment of our facilities, what it would cost to repair them, what the condition facility index is, so that that information can be used in all future year CIP. So it will be used every year.
Right. So do you know if a lot of our peer localities or other jurisdictions that are Stafford County size or larger, have they been using something like this for years?
Quite a few do. The most recent example, the city of Alexandria, is who we've talked to. They use this particular vendor, and so they've gone to this. They've had it about 2 years. Also, James Madison University uses this particular vendor, and they've done it about the same time, 2 to 3 year time frame.
Okay.
I would say, too, that this is consistent with your policy in the new CIP process. And things like this should come forward to you more in the future so that we have a really objective basis for what's in the CIP and can justify that. So
Yeah, it's very exciting that we're going to be doing this, and it's going to be a lot of work
Yes, ma'am.
inputting all the information.
It'll be great information.
Yes, it will.
Madam Chair.
Mr. Cavalier.
Yeah, I agree needs to be done because we aren't adding facilities at this time. We seem to be pretty good in that respect. But what I don't want to happen is the last time we brought in a consultant for Parks and Rec, and they told us about, our facilities needs, basically, and what we were short on and what we had too much of, and which was nothing, basically. But they really didn't present a good report. I don't think there was ever any action on it. And that's why I agree with Ms. Baumke here, that we really need to take this into consideration and act on, keep what we have good, make what we have better. That's what we need to focus on, because we don't have the funding, short of doing another park referendum to add to facilities. So, and are we going to be including school facilities in this too?
Yes, in fact, we did a demonstration with Mr. Rand and his staff of this software, and they too will use a similar type, will use the same software, in fact, so that we have similar data.
Okay, great.
Mr. Haran, would you like to add anything?
The school division enacted facility assessments probably in 2008. So we've been utilizing that to help us develop our infrastructure plans. Since then, we only did 2/3 of our schools because the other third were within 10 years of age, and so we hadn't done that. Now they've exceeded that for the most part 10 years of age. So we are pursuing in the 19 budget additional dollars to continue the facility assessment program. And so certainly we want to use the same vendor so that we have like-minded reports and analysis. And that way when we start to look at the infrastructure projects together as a whole, we'll have a common database. Make
Great.
sense?
Well, that's wonderful. I think that's a great way to show that we're all working towards the same goal and we're on the same page. Ms.
Yes, ma'am.
Mauer?
From what I understand about this, this is more of a software program where they're taking all of your facilities, they're adding it in, so it's not like one study that's going to be bound and put on a shelf. This is an interactive piece of program that is going to keep an eye on where we are from a capital improvement perspective of all of our facilities, correct?
That's correct. The first stage is to come and actually assess every roof,
Right.
Every plumbing, every component, so that we know what condition it's in, and then it goes into the software so we can plan for the future.
You have no idea how happy this makes me. It's all part and parcel of the larger joint CIP program, so thank you very much.
Okay. With that, is there a motion for R18-28?
So move.
Second.
All right, there's a motion and a second. Any more discussion? Cast your vote. Tally the vote. Motion passes unanimously. All right, and last but certainly not least, our school division. Authorize reappropriation of schools fiscal year 17 carryover funds and funding in the school's capital project reserve. Ms. Light.
Madam Chair, ladies and gentlemen of the board, per the board's financial policies, all unspent funds from the schools go to the school's capital projects reserve, which is held in the board's fund balance in our general fund. And the school board then has a resolution requesting to budget and appropriate this fund for capital projects. The audit is complete, and we have verified that these funds are available.
Okay, Ms. Mauer?
Okay, quick question, and this might be for the superintendent. This is on new business, so it'll come up as unfinished business at the next meeting. I know that with the wastewater treatment facility for Hartwood Elementary School, is this time sensitive? Can you contract in time?
I would say yes, it is time sensitive because some of the long lead items, so we have to go through the standard procurement process. So for the most part, 4 weeks, we'll be advertising the project. Once we have good bids, and we award the contract, so we go through a process to award it with the school board. At that point, when we give notice to proceed, there are several long lead items which require, so it is time sensitive, yes ma'am.
Would 2 weeks put you outside of your procurement process?
No ma'am.
Okay.
We're going to.
That was the question I was
We
asking.
certainly, just in transparency, we're going to parallel the effort, and I certainly don't want to be pretentious at all, but we're going to parallel the effort with the procurement. We can always cancel the procurement if the board chooses not to move forward with the funding. But we're going to parallel the effort, get it advertised, start the advertising process so that it's there. So if, in fact, our parallels with an approval process, we'll have that, and we'll be able to move forward without any delays.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
I do have one more question. Are we within budget on Moncure Elementary School? We're good?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
And on schedule.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Dudenheffer?
Please stay at the microphone, Mr. Herman. I really love putting you on the spot. I've done that many times over years, and it
Welcome back, sir.
brings me great joy. Thank you. I received a call from a school board member concerning a capital improvement project that you guys are going to come forward with, dealing with Hartwood Elementary sewer or improvements to their.
That's this one.
It's on this? Okay,
Yeah.
I apologize. You're off the hook.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
I didn't see it. I thought I looked. Yep, okay, thanks.
I guess the only question I have is I was surprised this did not receive a unanimous vote on the school board side for this being such a big and important project, but you don't have to answer that.
Thank you.
Well, I think my school board rep was one of the ones I think that voted against it, and I don't think she really understood what she was new, and she's, you know, I had a long talk with her about it, so.
Because something like this, and it's substantiate, as important as it is, and you can talk to our utilities people, what it's like to haul, do pump and haul out of a wastewater treatment facility for a week, it's not very much fun, so.
Well, I hope
As
nobody,
far as I'm concerned, it's a critical project.
I hope nobody goes back to my votes when I was on the board for 2 months, and
Oh, that's a good point, Mr. Dudenheffer. Mr. Cavalier?
Mr. Haran, the 1.64 million to upgrade the radio system, could you give me a little bit more information on that than what's in these couple sentences here?
Yes, sir. I'll try to. So that's for our transportation department to replace not only all the base stations, but also all the radios in all of our buses. We are still operating on a archaic, older system that still relies on some of the communication towers within the county, but the county EMS, Sheriff's Department, and others that use they vacated that system many years ago. I can't tell you exactly when. So we've been under some mandated pressure that the FCC wants certain frequencies back, as well as some pressure from the county government, the staff, not adverse pressure, but pressure to vacate the old systems. Not only is it taking space in the current towers around, that old equipment, we're the only ones that use it, is starting to become obsolete, and we can't maintain it with parts. So the consultant that helps maintain those systems is saying we can't maintain it. We've lost certain coverage on the old system for our buses. So there's parts of the county that our bus transportation radios cannot communicate with, specifically the Widewater Peninsula area. So we've been trying to pursue getting onto or piggybacking onto the county system, and there's certainly a capacity. However, the equipment has been the issue of us being able to fund it. So is that enough information, sir?
Well, no, so does this new equipment, is this piggybacked, is this duplicative of the county equipment? Is it interoperable with the county?
It's interoperable, it's the same, it's not duplicate, it adds on to it.
But you're not using the county contract to
We are.
purchase? You
We
are?
are, yes,
Okay,
sir.
that's all right.
My apologies. Yes, sir.
Okay, so you're going to buy basically the same type of equipment that we have.
Correct.
Have the same hardware and software components so that everybody will be able to
Correct.
interoperate.
Correct. And we're
Great.
working hand in hand with the sheriff department that oversee the radio system.
And
Great.
has the, I'm sorry.
And so I think we chalk this one up in the shared services department
Absolutely.
as another win.
Yes, sir. Win-win.
In fact,
So,
we did it through that process, actually.
Okay, great. So I'm looking at Mr. Mike Cannon in the back. He saw that we were having eye contact. So all the IT departments on both sides have given this their blessing. He's shaking his head.
I can't speak
so
for the county,
He's
but yes.
shaking his head. That's
Yes,
what
for
we
the school
needed to
district.
know.
Yes, sir. Yes,
Okay,
ma'am.
that's all. Thank you. Nodding. Yeah, he's nodding. Thank you. Okay, thank you, Mr. Haran. Appreciate you and Dr. Benson being here and sitting to the end. All right, is there a motion for R18?
What's the new
Oh,
business?
it's under, oh,
It's got to come back next meeting.
okay. So you're going to go ahead and advertise, and then we'll see it at the next meeting. Okay.
If I could, Madam Chair, the next time we have something like this, let's
should have moved it up.
accentuate that this is a shared service endeavor, and both sides can claim credit.
All right, that sounds good. Thank you. And then we have one item that was in the add-on folder for Mr. Dudenheffer's appointment to the Ag PDR program. And that is for Mr. Robert Broxton to represent the Garrisonville District.
It has to be deemed time sensitive. Excuse me, Madam Chairman, it needs to be deemed time sensitive only because the bylaws doesn't allow this to be added to consent via addition, so it has to be found time sensitive if the board's going to act today.
Oh, okay.
Add it to consent at the next agenda.
You can.
Okay.
Do they have a meeting between now and then?
They
I
just,
don't have that information.
Mr. Dudenheffer, their next meeting is actually on the 20th.
What's that? I'm sorry.
It's the day before the board meeting next time.
So the person wouldn't be allowed to be represented at the next board meeting. It wouldn't be until March. So then I move that can I make a motion?
I apologize.
Wait. Mark is
Excuse me,
saying
I had the date wrong.
The 19th or the 20th?
It's the Monday after the next board meeting, so actually there is
So
time.
we'll be fine. Okay.
Could
Thank
it
you,
be
Marcia.
included in the packages and the stuff you send out?
Sure,
Yeah,
we'll make
so
sure
it'll
that
be on
we
the
do that.
consent calendar. Okay, thank you.
A resolution to authorize closed meeting, whereas the board desires to hold a closed meeting for, one, consultation with legal counsel and briefings by staff members pertaining to actual litigation, whereas such consultation or briefing in open meeting would adversely affect the negotiating or litigating posture of the board. Two, discussion regarding the county attorney's retirement and vacancy. Three, discussion and consideration of an appointment to the vacant George Washington District Board of Supervisors seat. Whereas pursuant to Virginia Code 2.2-3711A1 and A7, such discussions may occur in closed meeting.
We are now in closed session.
I'd like to make a motion to certify.
Second.
Could everybody cast their votes? Certify closed session? Tally the votes? Motion passes.
Madam Chair, I'd like to make a motion to appoint Rashida McClendon as County Attorney of Stafford County effective March 1st, 2018, and authorize the Chairman of the Board to execute the employment agreement.
Second.
Okay, any discussion? All in favor, cast your vote.
Welcome.
Tally the vote. Oh. Okay. Okay, so basically, we're having a technical problem with the counting vote machine, so they have asked that we do a hand vote. Okay, so we have a motion to appoint Rashida McClendon as our new county attorney effective March 1, 2018. All those in favor, please raise your right hand.
All right.
Motion passes unanimously. Congratulations. We're looking forward to having you represent us. Okay, also, I would like to read a statement. The Stafford County Board of Supervisors received 7 applications for the vacant George Washington District Supervisor seat. We have reviewed the applications for many qualities, including county and community involvement, leadership, and a desire to serve the residents of the George Washington District. Shortly after notifying the applicants, the selected candidates will be posted to the website and will join the Board of Supervisors on Wednesday, February 7th, 2018, to complete the interview process. Because there are no public hearings and no evening session, the February 6, 2018 meeting of the Board of Supervisors is now adjourned.